You know this person, and there's a reasonable chance you might be this person yourself. The friend everyone calls when things fall apart. The one who listens at 2 a.m, who always seems to know what to say, who holds space for everyone's problems like it's their second job. We might call them the therapist friend, but there's so much more happening beneath the surface than we typically acknowledge. And understanding this role requires us to look deeper into the psychological patterns that create and sustain it. Let's talk about what's really going on in the mind of the person who's always playing therapist. Why this role is more complicated than it appears, and what it reveals about how we learn to navigate relationships and find our place in the world. Most people don't just wake up one day and decide to become the group therapist. And this role usually has roots that go back much further than we might initially recognize, often stretching all the way back to childhood. Psychologists have observed that many chronic caretakers grew up in environments where they had to be emotionally attuned to others just to feel safe, creating a foundation for patterns that would follow them into adulthood. Maybe they had a parent who was unpredictable, and they learned to read moods like a survival skill, becoming experts at detecting the subtle shifts in atmosphere that preceded conflict or emotional withdrawal. Maybe they were the peacekeeper in a family full of conflict, the one who learned to diffuse tension and mediate between warring parties before things escalated beyond control. Or perhaps they discovered early on that being helpful was the most reliable way to feel valued, that their worth in the family system was directly tied to their utility and their capacity to meet others' needs. This is what we call a learned behavior, and it runs deep in ways that shape not just how we act, but how we fundamentally see ourselves in relation to others. When you spend your formative years understanding that your worth is tied to what you can do for others, that belief doesn't just disappear when you grow up or move out or start building your own life. It becomes part of how you navigate the world, woven into the fabric of your identity so thoroughly that you often can't see it anymore, the way a fish might not notice the water it swims in. There's also something called parentification, a term that describes what happens when a child essentially becomes the emotional caretaker for their family, taking on responsibilities that should belong to adults. These kids grow up fast in ways that aren't always visible from the outside, developing sophisticated emotional intelligence and interpersonal skills while simultaneously missing out on the chance to simply be a child without the weight of others' well-being on their shoulders. They become little therapists before they even understand what therapy is, learning to manage their parents' emotions, their siblings' needs, and the overall emotional climate of the household. And while this can make them incredibly empathetic and insightful adults with a genuine gift for understanding people, it also means they never really learned that it's okay to have needs of their own, that receiving care is just as legitimate as giving it, that relationships can be spaces where they don't have to constantly perform emotional labor to justify their existence. What makes this pattern particularly interesting from a psychological perspective is that for many therapist friends, helping others isn't just a nice thing to do, or even primarily about altruism. It actually serves a specific psychological function for them, meeting needs that might not be immediately obvious. It's a way of managing their own anxiety, their own sense of worth, their own fear of being abandoned or rejected, all of which might otherwise feel overwhelming or unmanageable. When you're the person everyone needs, you feel secure in a way that can be difficult to achieve through other means. And this sense of security comes from knowing you have a clear purpose and an established place in people's lives. You have a role that feels important and meaningful. You're not going anywhere because you're too valuable to lose. And this certainty can be deeply comforting for someone who might otherwise struggle with feelings of inadequacy or fears of abandonment. This is what psychologists might call a defense mechanism, though that term sounds harsher and more calculating than the reality actually is. It's not manipulation or some kind of conscious strategy to control people through manufactured indispensability, but rather an unconscious pattern your mind developed to help you feel safe and important in your relationships. A way of ensuring that you won't be left behind or forgotten. There's also something deeply satisfying about being able to fix things for other people, especially when your own life might feel messy or out of control in ways you don't quite know how to address. It's easier to solve someone else's problems than to sit with your own, to offer them the clarity and perspective you can't seem to find when looking at your own situation. When you're focused on helping your friend through a breakup, analyzing what went wrong and what they should do next, you don't have to think about your own loneliness or the ways your own relationships might be unfulfilling. When you're coaching someone through a career crisis, helping them strategize and encouraging them to take risks, you can avoid confronting your own professional dissatisfaction or the dreams you've been putting on hold. This is what's called displacement in psychological terms, and it's remarkably common across various contexts and types of relationships. The therapist friend becomes so skilled at turning outward, at directing their attention and analytical abilities toward others' lives and problems, that turning inward feels foreign and uncomfortable, and even frightening in its unfamiliarity. They've developed such expertise in understanding others that they've neglected the parallel skill of understanding themselves. And this creates a kind of emotional asymmetry that can be difficult to recognize from inside the pattern. We need to be clear about something that often goes unacknowledged in discussions of these dynamics. Emotional labor is real labor, just as demanding and depleting as physical work, even though it leaves no visible traces. When you're the therapist friend, you're constantly processing other people's emotions, holding space for their pain and confusion, regulating their anxiety while simultaneously managing your own response to what they're telling you. And all of this takes energy, significant, measurable energy that gets depleted and needs replenishment, just like any other resource. What makes it particularly draining, though, is that it's often invisible labor that others don't see or recognize as work, because it doesn't fit our conventional understanding of effort and exertion. Nobody sees the weight you're carrying around with you after those conversations end, the way their problems continue to occupy space in your mind. They don't see you lying awake thinking about their situations, worrying if you gave them the right advice or said the wrong thing, feeling responsible for their well-being in ways that extend far beyond what any friend should reasonably carry. They don't see the moments when you want to talk about your own struggles but hold back because you don't want to burden them, or because you've learned through repeated experience that people don't really know what to do with your problems the way you know what to do with theirs, that they become uncomfortable or change the subject, or offer platitudes that reveal they're not equipped to support you the way you support them. And because you're so good at this role, because you've developed such skill at appearing calm and capable and endlessly available, people assume it comes naturally to you, that you're just built differently in some way that makes emotional labor effortless. They assume it doesn't cost you anything because you never complain, never seem depleted, never turn them away when they need you. But every conversation takes something. Even when you care deeply about the person you're helping, even when you genuinely want to be there for them, the cost is real, regardless of your intentions or feelings, and over time these costs accumulate in ways that can lead to burnout, resentment, and a profound sense of depletion that you might not even recognize as being connected to all this helping you've been doing. One of the most painful paradoxes of being the therapist friend is that you're often surrounded by people but feel deeply alone in ways that are difficult to explain to others who see you as perpetually connected and supported. You know everyone's secrets, everyone's fears, everyone's dreams and disappointments, and you hold all of this information about the people in your life, creating what looks like deep intimacy and connection. But who knows your secrets? Who really knows your fears? And who have you trusted with the full reality of your own dreams and disappointments? This happens for several interrelated reasons that reinforce each other over time. First, when you're always in the helper role, you train people to see you a certain way and to interact with you according to specific, predictable patterns. They come to rely on your strength, your stability, your capacity to handle whatever they bring to you without falling apart or becoming overwhelmed. Showing your own vulnerability can actually feel threatening to the relationship because it disrupts the dynamic everyone's gotten used to, challenging the fundamental terms on which the relationship has been operating. It's as if you've been cast in a specific role in the play of your social circle, and suddenly, trying to switch roles mid-performance creates confusion and discomfort for everyone involved. Second, therapist friends often develop incredibly high standards for what counts as a real problem, worthy of others' attention and concern. They've heard so much, held space for so much genuine trauma and crisis and suffering, that their own struggles can feel trivial by comparison, too small and insignificant to mention. Someone just told you about their parents' terminal illness, or their own battle with addiction, or the abuse they survived. How can you possibly complain about feeling lonely, or overwhelmed, or uncertain about your future, when measured against that kind of suffering? This creates what psychologists call invalidation, but you're doing it to yourself, dismissing your own emotional experience because it doesn't meet some arbitrary threshold of significance that you've internalized. You become the harshest judge of your own right to struggle, telling yourself that your problems don't matter enough, that you should be able to handle this, that you have no right to ask for support when others are dealing with so much more. The result is a strange kind of isolation that's particularly difficult because it exists within apparent connection and community. You're connected to many people, but known by very few at any real depth beyond your role as helper and supporter. You're the supporting character in everyone else's story, always present in the background, providing wisdom and encouragement. But who's actually seeing the full story of yours? Who's witnessing your struggles and fears with the same attention you give to theirs? This creates a loneliness that can be harder to bear than simple social isolation, because it's loneliness within connection. The pain of being surrounded by people who care about you, but don't really know you beyond the role you play for them. For many therapist friends, there comes a moment, sometimes gradual and creeping, sometimes sudden and disorienting, when they start to wonder, who am I if I'm not helping someone? If I'm not needed? If I'm not performing this role that's become so central to how I move through the world? If I'm not the person people call at 2 a.m, if I'm not solving problems and offering perspective and holding space, then what exactly is my value? And how do I know I matter? This is the existential dimension of the role that goes beyond simple behavior patterns and touches on fundamental questions of identity and selfhood. When your entire identity becomes built around being the helper, the listener, the problem solver, the one who's always there for others, you can lose touch with other parts of yourself that don't serve this function. Your hobbies fall away because you're always making time for others who need you right now. And creative pursuits or personal interests start to feel like selfish indulgences when someone might need your support. Your own goals get put on hold Queensland because someone needs you to help them through a crisis, and your dreams can wait while their emergencies demand immediate attention. Your preferences, your desires, your boundaries, they all become negotiable and flexible in service of maintaining this role and meeting others' expectations of your constant availability. This isn't anyone's fault necessarily, not yours, and not the people who've come to rely on you, because it's more systemic than that. It's just what happens when a coping mechanism that started as a way to feel safe and valued gradually becomes the whole structure of who you are, the entire foundation on which your sense of self is built. And dismantling that structure, even when you know intellectually that you need to, because it's not sustainable, feels terrifying, because you're not sure what will be left underneath. If you remove the helper role, if you peel away all the layers of people-pleasing and caretaking and emotional labor, what remains at the core? Who are you when you're not performing this function for others? Let's talk about something that's difficult to admit, and that many therapist friends struggle to acknowledge even to themselves. Sometimes, the therapist friend needs to be needed more than their friends actually need help, and the entire dynamic serves their psychological needs as much or more than it serves the people they're supposedly helping. This isn't about manipulation or bad intentions or conscious calculation. And recognizing this pattern doesn't mean you're a bad person exploiting others for your own gain. It's about the psychological comfort that comes from feeling indispensable, from knowing that you have a secure place in people's lives because they depend on you. When someone comes to you with a problem, it confirms something important that you might doubt in other contexts. You have value. You matter in a concrete and measurable way. You're not going to be abandoned because you're too useful and they need what you provide. This creates a subtle but powerful dynamic where you might unconsciously encourage dependence in small ways that you don't fully recognize. You might give advice that positions you as the expert whose guidance they'll need to seek again, rather than helping them develop their own problem-solving skills. You might offer to do things for people that they could reasonably do themselves, taking on their responsibilities because it makes you feel needed. You might even feel a little lost or anxious when people start solving their own problems without consulting you, when they develop other sources of support, when they demonstrate that they can actually function fine without your constant input and assistance. There's a concept in psychology called codependency, and while that term gets thrown around a lot in popular discourse and sometimes loses its precision, it applies in specific and relevant ways to the therapist-friend dynamic. Codependency isn't just about staying in unhealthy relationships or enabling someone's addiction, though those are contexts where it appears. It's about needing to be needed so much that your sense of self depends on someone else needing you. Your identity becomes tied to your role in their life, and your well-being becomes so entangled with their well-being that boundaries start to blur in ways that ultimately serve neither person. You can't feel okay unless they're okay. You can't rest unless their problems are solved. And you derive so much of your self-worth from helping them that their independence or improvement actually threatens something in you. For the therapist friend, this can mean feeling anxious when people don't come to them with problems, interpreting their absence as a sign that something's wrong in the relationship or that you're losing your value to them. It can mean feeling jealous or hurt when someone gets support from someone else, when they go to a different friend for advice, or start seeing an actual therapist who might replace the role you've been filling. It can mean deriving so much identity and purpose from the helper role that pulling back feels like losing yourself, like dismantling the only version of yourself that you know how to be or that feels safe and familiar. And now we arrive at something that many therapist friends feel but rarely say out loud because it contradicts the selfless image they've cultivated and seems to invalidate all the helping they've been doing. The resentment that builds slowly, often imperceptibly, accumulating in small moments until it becomes impossible to ignore. You start noticing that your friend only calls when they need something, that weeks can go by without contact until they're in crisis and suddenly remember you exist. You realize that conversations are always about them, that even when you try to share something about your own life, it gets redirected back to their situation within minutes. You see that people take your availability for granted, assuming you'll always be there, always say yes, always have the energy and capacity to show up for them, regardless of what's happening in your own life. But you don't say anything about this growing resentment, because saying something would mean admitting that you're not actually fine with how things are, that the role you've been playing isn't entirely voluntary or satisfying. It would mean setting a boundary, and boundaries feel dangerous when your entire sense of security is built on being boundless in your support, when being unlimited in your availability is what makes you valuable and necessary. So the resentment stays quiet, pushed down and rationalized away, and you keep saying yes when you want to say no. Keep listening when you desperately need to be heard. Keep giving when you're running on empty. And slowly, gradually, the very thing that once made you feel connected and important starts making you feel used and taken for granted, and fundamentally unseen. This resentment isn't a character flaw or a sign that you're selfish or a bad friend, even though you might judge yourself harshly for feeling it. It's actually a healthy signal from your psyche, telling you that something is out of balance, that the relationship has become too one-sided, that you're giving more than you're receiving in ways that aren't sustainable. The problem is that many therapist friends have learned to override these signals so consistently, to push through their own needs and feelings in service of being there for others, that they can barely hear them anymore. The resentment has to get very loud, has to build up to the point where it's affecting your mental health and your relationships before you finally pay attention to what it's been trying to tell you all along. What often goes unexamined is the actual cost of maintaining this constant availability, and what gets sacrificed in the process of always being there for everyone else. The therapist friend typically puts their own needs last, not occasionally or in emergencies, but as a consistent pattern that structures their entire life. They cancel their own plans when someone needs them. They put off their own projects and goals because someone's crisis takes priority. They neglect their own well-being because they're too busy managing everyone else's emotions and problems. Over time, this creates a kind of self-abandonment where you become so focused on others that you lose touch with yourself entirely. You don't know what you want anymore, because you've spent so long focusing on what others want. You don't know what you feel because you've been too busy managing others' feelings. You don't know what your limits are because you've been pushing through them for so long that the signals have become indistinct. This self-abandonment is perhaps the deepest cost of the therapist-friend role, because it erodes your relationship with yourself, making you a stranger to your own needs and desires. There's also the cost to your other relationships and life areas that get neglected while you're busy being everyone's therapist. Romantic relationships suffer because you have no energy left for your partner after giving it all away to friends. Career advancement stalls because you're not networking or pursuing opportunities. You're helping everyone else with their careers instead. Your physical health declines because you're not exercising or eating well or getting enough sleep. You're too busy being available at all hours for others. Your creative projects never get finished. Your dreams remain perpetually on hold. Your potential stays unrealized because all your resources are being directed towards supporting others rather than building your own life. So, what does it mean to heal from this pattern? To find a way forward that doesn't require you to either stay trapped in this role or completely abandon your capacity for empathy and support. It's not about stopping being a supportive friend or becoming cold and selfish or cutting off everyone who's ever come to you for help. It's about examining why you need this role so much, what psychological function it's serving, and what you're avoiding by staying in it. Healing starts with recognizing that your worth isn't conditional on what you do for others, that you have inherent value simply by existing, regardless of your utility or productivity or capacity to meet others' needs. You don't have to earn your place in people's lives through constant service and self-sacrifice, through being endlessly available and helpful. The people who truly care about you want to know the real you, not just the version that's always holding it together and solving problems. And they want reciprocal relationships where support flows both ways, rather than one person always giving while the other always receives. It means learning to tolerate the profound discomfort of being vulnerable, of having needs, of not being the strong one all the time, of asking for help instead of always providing it. This discomfort is real and significant, because vulnerability has felt dangerous for so long. But learning to sit with it is essential for building more authentic connections. It means recognizing that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone, the thing that actually serves their growth and development, is to let them sit with their own problems instead of rushing in to fix everything. When you constantly rescue people from their difficulties, you rob them of the opportunity to develop their own resilience and problem-solving skills, and you keep them dependent on you in ways that don't ultimately serve either of you. Healing also means grieving, honestly and fully, the losses that come with changing this pattern. Grieving the childhood that taught you that love was something you had to earn through good behavior and meeting others' needs, rather than something you deserved simply by being yourself. Grieving the relationships that might shift or even fall away when you stop playing therapist. When you set boundaries and prioritize your own well-being and can no longer meet people's expectations of your constant availability. Some people will be uncomfortable with your changes, will resist your boundaries, will even get angry that you're no longer the person they could always count on to drop everything and help them. And losing those relationships hurts, even when you know intellectually that they weren't healthy. Grieving the version of yourself that found safety in being needed, because letting go of that identity means finding a new way to feel secure in the world. And that transition is genuinely difficult, even when it's necessary. The path forward requires actively building new patterns to replace the old ones, not just trying to stop the problematic behaviors, but creating alternative ways of relating to yourself and others. This means practicing self-compassion, talking to yourself with the same kindness and understanding you extend to others, treating your own struggles and needs as worthy of attention, even when they feel small compared to others' problems. It means setting boundaries, even when it feels uncomfortable or selfish, saying no to requests that exceed your capacity, limiting your availability so you have time and energy for your own life. It means seeking out reciprocal relationships where you're not always in the helper role, where other people support you with the same care and attention you've been giving them, where vulnerability is mutual rather than one-sided. This might require being intentional about asking for help, even when it feels unnatural, sharing your struggles, even when you want to minimize them, being honest about your needs, even when you've spent years pretending you don't have any. It might also mean ending or significantly changing relationships that can't adapt to this new dynamic, where people only want the version of you that serves their needs and can't or won't show up for you in return. Building new patterns also means rediscovering who you are beyond the helper role, exploring interests and pursuits that have nothing to do with taking care of others, developing parts of yourself that have been neglected while you've been focused outward. This might feel selfish or indulgent at first, and that discomfort is worth noting and working through, rather than using it as a reason to abandon the effort. You deserve to have a full, rich life that includes your own goals and dreams and pleasures, not just a life spent in service of others' needs and problems. The friend who always plays therapist isn't broken or damaged beyond repair, and they're not doing relationships wrong, even though the pattern isn't sustainable. They've simply developed a very sophisticated strategy for navigating relationships and managing their own internal world. A strategy that once served important protective functions, even if it's now creating more problems than it solves. But like any strategy, like any pattern of behavior that becomes too rigid and all-encompassing, it comes with costs that eventually become too high to keep paying. The path forward isn't about becoming less caring, or less empathetic, or less attuned to others' needs and feelings, because those are genuine gifts that make the world a better place. It's about caring for yourself with the same energy and attention you've been giving everyone else. Building relationships where support flows both ways, instead of always in one direction. Learning to value yourself for who you are, rather than what you do. It's about understanding that you can be valued for your inherent worth as a person, not just your utility as a helper. That rest and self-care are not selfish indulgences, but necessary for sustainable functioning. That boundaries are not betrayals, but healthy limits that protect everyone involved. It's about recognizing that saying, "I don't have the capacity for this right now," doesn't make you a bad friend. It makes you an honest one, who's learning to honor their own humanity. And perhaps most importantly, it's about understanding that the most therapeutic thing you can do, both for yourself and for the people in your life, is to model what it looks like to honor your own needs without guilt or apology. Because when you stop abandoning yourself in service of everyone else, when you demonstrate that it's possible to be kind and caring while also maintaining boundaries and prioritizing your own well-being, you give others permission to do the same. The friend who always plays therapist deserves the same compassion they've been giving everyone else for so long, and maybe learning to give themselves that compassion, to treat themselves as worthy of care and attention, is the real work they've been avoiding all along, while staying busy with everyone else's problems.